masses of unhappiness to be created.
Oh, Paula. Oh, Paula, what have Charles and William done to deserve this?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you feel, Dan, but I don't look that kindly on Charles Spencer.
I'm no fan.
I think of him as
I am no fan of this man.
Yeah, I feel like he's a bit of a grift.
The announcement that King Charles III had cancer on February 4th, 2024 was, by most accounts, not a planned act of royal transparency. It was a panicked response to a situation that had spiraled beyond the palace's control in under 10 days. The king had publicly announced his prostate procedure weeks earlier, generating intense media interest in his recovery. When an unrelated cancer was found during that procedure, the palace faced an impossible choice: lie in response to the world's simplest question, or announce a diagnosis they were nowhere near ready to manage publicly. They chose to announce and then immediately retreated into the kind of silence that contradicted everything they had said about a new era of royal openness. What followed was 2 years of confusion, contradictory signals, and an institution visibly struggling to regain its footing. Charles has spent 3 decades being told by a significant portion of the country that the woman he married is calculating. He has spent those same 3 decades defending her quietly, at real cost to himself. He married her when doing so was still a genuine risk to the institution. He placed her name on the coronation invitation when his advisors were uneasy about it. Whatever anyone thinks of that marriage, he has never wavered. And now there was a screen on his desk showing him her handwriting. The valet was sent out, the colour drained from the king's face, and then returned in a way that everyone in that household consistently describes with one word: not shouting, purple.
There was another sort of repercussion from this interview, Paula, and I'm sure the King and Queen and William will be happy about it, although it's only temporary relief. They managed to push this bombshell announcement by Earl Spencer, Princess Diana's brother, off the British newspaper front pages, apart from the Daily Mail, which actually ran with these revelations rather than Queen Camilla.
Because Charles is not a fool, he understood within a few seconds what this would cost if it played out live. A queen physically separating a prince and princess of Wales during a broadcast going to 50 countries in front of ambassadors and heads of state, with thousands of people on the hill holding up phones. That is not a family embarrassment. That is an image that gets used for the next 40 years every time anyone needs to explain the condition of the British monarchy in a single frame. And the damage would not have landed on Camilla, it would have landed on the 2 people the entire institution now depends on to carry it forward.
And I'm sure the King and Queen and William will be happy about it, although it's only temporary relief. They managed to push this bombshell announcement by Earl Spencer, Princess Diana's brother, off the British newspaper front pages, apart from the Daily Mail, which actually ran with these revelations rather than Queen Camilla's announcement. The Daily Mail actually broke this story initially, and
there was no family meeting arranged, no quiet conversation through private secretaries, no documents circulated for review. Anyone who knows how that household normally manages a problem should pause here and notice that, because every instinct in that building points toward handling things quietly and leaving nothing in writing. Charles did the opposite. He has spent his adult life inside the aftermath of what quiet management produces. Everything that happened to his first wife happened quietly. Everything was arranged by reasonable people who wrote nothing down. And by the end of it, there was no record of who had decided what, and a 15-year-old boy walked behind a coffin through a city that had already made up its own mind about all of them.
Relief. They managed to push this bombshell announcement by Earl Spencer, Princess Diana's brother, off the British newspaper front pages, apart from the Daily Mail, which actually ran with these revelations rather than Queen Camilla's announcement. The Daily Mail actually broke this story initially, and I believe want this serialization badly.
He went to the oak cabinet in the corner of the room and removed the things that only come out when something has gone genuinely wrong. A beeswax candle, a stick of dark red sealing wax, a sheet of parchment. He wrote the instruction out by hand, held the wax above the flame until it ran, dripped it at the bottom of the page, and pressed his signet ring into it while it was still soft, leaving the crown's impression in red. That is not ceremonial decoration. In that family, a sealed instruction is the difference between a personal preference and an order that a serving officer is obliged to carry out immediately, without going back up the line for confirmation.
Princess Diana's brother off the British newspaper front pages, apart from the Daily Mail, which actually ran with these revelations rather than Queen Camilla's announcement. The Daily Mail actually broke this story initially, and I believe want this serialization badly. They want the book. They want the Diana book, and they have previously serialized.
He read it back once before applying the seal, something people who knew him in his younger years say he never used to do. He does it now. The instruction carried two parts. The Prince and Princess of Wales would walk together for the full length of the procession, and that arrangement was not to be altered by anyone. The officer holding the document was authorized to remove any person who broke the approved order, regardless of rank or title, in front of whoever happened to be watching. Regardless of rank or title, 4 words on a piece of parchment, written by a man who was about to walk his wife out in front of the world. The following morning, he handed it to his sister.
Daily Mail, which actually ran with these revelations rather than Queen Camilla's announcement. The Daily Mail actually broke this story initially, and I believe want this serialization badly. They want the book. They want the Diana book, and they have previously serialized Earl Spencer's book. But look, Paula, there are huge repercussions.
Most people watching the broadcast had no clear understanding of what they were looking at when they watched Anne. She holds the position of Gold Stick in Waiting, one of the oldest appointments in the country, dating to the 15th century. During a state ceremony, the physical safety and proper conduct of the sovereign's procession falls formally under her authority. She carried it at the coronation, riding behind her brother in uniform. She has carried it at the state opening of Parliament. Alongside that appointment, she has been a Royal Lady of the Order of the Garter since 1994. At Windsor in June, she is not a guest at that procession. She is part of its operating structure.
Rather than Queen Camilla's announcement. The Daily Mail actually broke this story initially, and I believe want this serialization badly. They want the book. They want the Diana book, and they have previously serialized Earl Spencer's book. But look, Paula, there are huge repercussions about what Earl Spencer is doing. Tom Bower has just appeared on GB News.
The practical consequence is the part that mattered on that day. When Anne tells a procession to stop, it stops. No one in the line holds any standing to dispute her, including the woman married to the king. Charles gave her the parchment in his own rooms, with William standing by the window, and told her to carry it out without any consideration for his wife. Sources close to that morning say Anne read it once, folded it, and asked one question: whether her brother understood she would do it in front of the cameras if necessary. He said he had. She placed it inside her jacket and went to change. That was the real decision of the day, made quietly in a private room an hour before anyone left the castle.
And I believe want this serialization badly. They want the book. They want the Diana book, and they have previously serialized Earl Spencer's book. But look, Paula, there are huge repercussions about what Earl Spencer is doing. Tom Bower has just appeared on GB News and said what we all know, but it's still incredible.
Garter Day at Windsor is one of the few things the country still does entirely without irony. Clear sky, thousands of people packed along the route from the castle to the chapel, flags, children on shoulders, older spectators who had come every June for 30 years standing in the same spot they always stand, the mounted band, the yeomen, the blue velvet robes and plumed hats that look excessive in a photograph and look like something else entirely when 800 years of them come down a hill toward a crowd. Every fixed camera position had been agreed weeks earlier. The procession moved through the castle gates in order, and Camilla walked out beside the king, wearing a smile that broadcast correspondents would all later describe the same way. comfortable.
Badly. They want the book. They want the
Of
Diana
course.
book, and they have previously serialized Earl Spencer's book. But look, Paula, there are huge repercussions about what Earl Spencer is doing. Tom Bower has just appeared on GB News and said what we all know, but it's still incredibly interesting in this context. This is not good news for the royal family because Earl...
She scanned the crowd. She looked at the camera platforms. She believed, with total certainty, that her page was in the folder and her page was what the coordinators were working from. She had no way of knowing that a corrected order had been handed to the coordinators at 7 that morning, or that the woman walking a few places behind her was carrying a sealed instruction inside her jacket, or that the entire sequence had been sitting on a tablet since the afternoon before. For about 4 minutes, everything looked exactly as it has looked every June for as long as anyone watching had been alive.
Serialized Earl Spencer's book. But look, Paula, there are huge repercussions about what Earl Spencer is doing. Tom Bower has just appeared on GB News and said what we all know, but it's still incredibly interesting in this context. This is not good news for the royal family because Earl Spencer remains furious with King Charles and doesn't like Prince.
The procession reached the open square in front of St. George's Chapel. The crowd was thickest there. The camera positions were closest. Any change in the shape of the line was visible to every single person present. That is where she moved. She picked up her pace. She came through the line at an angle, quickly, the way a person moves when they have rehearsed something in their head enough times to have stopped consciously thinking about it. She stepped directly into the space between William and Catherine. Her shoulder caught Catherine's arm as she came through. The robe did the rest. That much fabric moving sideways is a wall, and it swung across the main camera platform's shot.
Huge repercussions about what Earl Spencer is doing. Tom Bower has just appeared on GB News and said what we all know, but it's still incredibly interesting in this context. This is not good news for the royal family because Earl Spencer remains furious with King Charles and doesn't like Prince William, yet is in the same camp of Harry and Meghan. Watch this.
For a second and a half, the Princess of Wales was a hand and a sleeve at the edge of a frame built to hold 4 people. Catherine broke her stride to avoid colliding with her. She recovered it inside a single step, the way she recovers everything, and kept her face completely still. Camilla looked back over her shoulder at her once. The expression 2 photographers on that platform caught has been on the internet ever since. She had about 3 seconds to feel satisfied by it.
Appeared on GB News and said what we all know, but it's still incredibly interesting in this context. This is not good news for the royal family because Earl Spencer remains furious with King Charles and doesn't like Prince William, yet is in the same camp of Harry and Meghan. Watch this. Fresh Harry and Meghan updates every single day. Yes, the ones the Montecito Mafia and MS...
Because a white glove went up at the front of the line. Anne stopped walking, raised her hand straight above her head, and held it there. The effect on 800 people in formation is instant and complete. The band cut, the line concertinaed and stopped. The crowd noise dropped in a wave from the front of the square to the back, the way it does when several thousand people all register at the same moment that something is wrong. A royal procession does not stop. That is the point of a royal procession. It has stopped for a death. It has stopped for a confirmed threat. Outside of those things, it does not stop. Everyone on that square with any knowledge of these events understood within 2 seconds that they were watching something none of them would see again.
It's still incredibly interesting in this context. This is not good news for the royal family because Earl Spencer remains furious with King Charles and doesn't like Prince William, yet is in the same camp of Harry and Meghan. Watch this. Fresh Harry and Meghan updates every single day. Yes, the ones the Montecito Mafia and MSM don't want out there. Subscribe to Outspoken for daily royal coverage. It's
The silence lasted longer than television is comfortable with. Then Anne stepped out of the formation. She walked back down the line, in front of the crowd, in front of the cameras, in front of the diplomatic guests standing at the chapel door, and stopped in front of the wife of the king. No one has ever confirmed exactly what she said, The microphones on that platform captured nothing usable. 3 people close enough to hear have given the same short version to 2 different journalists. It comes down to 4 words. Back to your place. And then she stood there and waited, which is the part that finished it. She did not repeat herself. She did not take her by the arm. She stood in the middle of that square and waited for a queen to move. Camilla's expression collapsed. Everyone who has seen the footage has watched the same sequence happen in about a second and a half. The confidence goes first, then the colour, then something underneath both of them that she has spent 20 years keeping the cameras away from. She understood immediately that the folder had not protected her, and that everyone in her eyeline already knew it. She moved. William stepped across, took his wife's hand, and walked her forward into the space that had opened up. The 2 of them moved toward the chapel door together, and the crowd on both sides of them began to applaud, because a British crowd will always identify who to applaud within 4 seconds of anything happening, and that crowd had been paying close attention. Camilla was left at the edge of the line. The formation closed. She fell in at the back, behind people she has outranked at every ceremony for 20 years. She walked the last 100 yards to the chapel door in the wrong position, in full robes, in front of ambassadors and heads of state, and several thousand people who had all seen exactly what had happened and had begun audibly talking about it. There is a long lens shot from the hill that shows that final walk. Her chin is up, her eyes are forward. Her face shows nothing, because she had it back under control by then. That is the most publicly visible humiliation handed to a queen consort in living memory, and it took 40 seconds, and no one touched her. Then the chapel doors closed, and the cameras stayed outside. Whatever the crowd understood from the square, what happened in the following 20 minutes on the other side of that door is a separate story. The private room at St. George's is smaller than most people picture. Stone walls, a long table, a few heavy chairs. One window with old glass, oak doors thick enough that when they shut, 800 people outside go silent in about a second. 2 men closed those doors and stood in front of them. The moment the public was behind that wood, Camilla turned around and released everything she had been holding for the last 100 yards. She directed it at the king first. Voice raised, hands moving, the words coming in the order they had apparently been arriving in her head for the full length of that walk. Her question was how he could humiliate her in front of the entire world. She is the queen. He had let it happen. He had destroyed her standing for the sake of a daughter-in-law. Her breathing was audible across the room. Social media versions of that scene describe it as screaming. Everyone actually present has been consistent on this point. She was not screaming. She was doing something worse than screaming. She was arguing at volume, in front of witnesses, with her husband, on the day of a state ceremony, in a room she could not leave. And Catherine stepped forward. In 14 years of public life, that woman has never once inserted herself into a confrontation. She is the person in that family who quiets situations, who steps back, who smiles and steers everyone through the doorway. She did not do that here. She walked to the middle of the room, looked directly at Camilla, and said the only thing said in that entire 20 minutes that Camilla could not answer. Nobody else caused this. She had walked between a husband and a wife in front of the cameras herself, and everything that followed had come directly from that. Camilla laughed. That is what every account says, and it is the detail worth returning to, because it tells you exactly how secure she still believed she was at that moment. She laughed and said the ceremonial chart had recorded the order that way, and asked what right anyone in that room had to accuse her of anything without evidence. She was not bluffing. She genuinely believed there was nothing left to produce. She was standing in a stone room in full robes, daring the future king to produce evidence, certain the sheet had been destroyed, certain that her assistant had taken care of it, the way she had taken it on faith that he would, and she was about 10 feet from a table. Nobody answered her immediately. Anne answered a different question instead. And this is the moment that broke Catherine. She had been standing very straight since the doors closed, doing the thing she has been doing without fault since she was 29 years old, holding her face completely still and letting the room happen around her. She had done it on the square, with a shoulder hitting her arm and a camera fixed on her face. She had done it on the walk up the hill. She was still doing it. Anne came over and said one thing to her quietly, and it had nothing to do with Camilla. She told her that her mother-in-law used to do exactly that Diana, when something went wrong in front of the cameras, would absorb the impact, keep her face still, and finish the walk. That she had learned it very young, and it had cost her something every single time. That was the thing that got through. Not the shoulder, not the robe, not 20 minutes of being discussed in the third person by a woman standing 8 feet away. A remark about a woman who has been gone since 1997, from the one person in that family who was present to watch it happen. Catherine's composure went, and she did not recover it. She did not sob, she did not sit down, she did not give anyone in that room anything to describe afterward. But she stood there with her chin up, and the tears came, and she let them come, because there was nothing left in her to stop them with. Nobody in that room spoke for a moment. The king looked at the floor. Anne stayed exactly where she was, which is what she does, and placed one hand briefly on her nephew's wife's arm, then withdrew it. Her husband saw it, and that is when William went to the table. He had been silent since the doors closed. Everyone who describes that room places him the same way, standing near the window, saying nothing, letting his stepmother talk herself all the way to the end of the branch she was standing on. He crossed to the long table and placed 2 things on it, flat, where everyone could see them. The first was a tablet. He turned it around and pressed play. The room watched a man in a corridor open a leather binder, look at the door, take out one page, and put in another. The second thing he laid on the table was the handwritten sheet itself, her ink, her hand, the gap between 2 names, and the arrow drawn into it. It had never been destroyed. William's people had gone into the operations room and retrieved it within 10 minutes of the procession leaving the castle gates. It had been in his coat pocket for the entire walk down the hill, including the moment she had stepped between his wife and himself. Camilla stopped talking. The accounts of that moment are consistent. She looked at the sheet on the table, and her body gave out before her face did. She took a backward step she had not planned, reached out and caught the arm of one of the heavy chairs to stay upright. Nobody in the room moved toward her. That detail has stayed close. 6 people in a room, 1 person going down, and every single one of them stayed exactly where they were. Then Charles walked over. He placed one more thing on the table beside her handwriting and set it flat so she could read what was at the bottom. Parchment, handwriting, a disc of dark red wax with the impression of a crown pressed into it. She looked at the seal and understood what it was before she read a word, because she has lived in that world for 20 years and she knows precisely what comes out of that cabinet and how rarely. Charles did not raise his voice. Everyone who has described what he said uses the same words, flat and very tired. He asked whether she had believed he was not watching. He told her he had signed that instruction the previous night after his son had shown him the tablet. He told her the trap on the square had not been laid by anyone. She had walked into a space that existed only on a page she had drawn herself. Then he said the sentence that ended it. She had used a lie to act against them, and now the truth was going to do the remaining work on its own. Camilla sat down on the sofa behind her without intending to. The room went quiet, except for her breathing. No one in that family said another word to her for the rest of the service. What follows is an analytical reading rather than confirmed account, and it is offered as such. She did not go into that day intending to end her own position. She went in intending to win a photograph. 20 years of being the second most watched woman in every room she enters had become a habit of small adjustments. This was one more adjustment, slightly larger than the last, on a page she believed no one would ever see. That is how people in that world come undone. Not in one enormous decision, in one more small one, taken on a night when the large ones had all already gone wrong. What followed came fast, and the speed of it signals that the decision had been made well before the chapel doors opened again. Within 24 hours, Charles signed a second instruction. No negotiation, no cooling period, no quiet conversation with her advisors about how it might be framed. He stripped her ceremonial privileges, and the first thing removed was the one everyone in that household immediately understood, the golden key to the grand entrance at Windsor. That key was an object she had wanted for years, and had received at a moment she treated as the close of a long argument about whether she belonged. It came back. The door it opened was chained in front of palace staff, in daylight. The message that sent through the building needed no explanation to anyone who worked there. 2 members of staff carried the chain across the courtyard in the middle of the afternoon, while a delivery was being unloaded 20 feet away. Nothing was announced. Nothing needed to be, in a building where 400 people work and every one of them talks. A chained door communicates more in an afternoon than a press office manages in a year. Catherine holds the key now. Charles wrote a letter placing his own name behind his daughter-in-law's position at ceremonial events, the kind of document that exists precisely so that no one can later claim it was informal. He reduced his wife's schedule, removed her from joint appearances with the next generation, and cancelled shared engagements with his sons. The assistant was gone from the palace the same day. He had been part of that household for years. He had one bad 40 seconds in a corridor, and he will not work anywhere near that world again for the rest of his life. He is the only person in this entire story who lost his income over it. And he is the only person in it who was told to do what he did by someone he had no power to refuse. There is an observation that belongs here, that in that family the staff always pay in full and the principals always pay in degrees. Look at how this story ended for the man in the corridor, and how it ended for the woman who sent him, and the accuracy of that observation is not difficult to assess. Because she is still queen, nobody took the title, nobody could. She spoke to Charles about it afterward, more than once. What she said in those conversations is the closest thing to an explanation that anyone has obtained. She told him she had been afraid of being overshadowed by William and Catherine. She told him she had begun to feel she held no real authority in that house at all. That is the most quietly devastating sentence in this entire story, because she was right. She never did. Everything she had came through one man, and on the morning she tried to claim a few feet of carpet for herself, that man handed a sealed page to his sister and let the whole thing proceed exactly as he had designed it. There is one further detail that emerged from William's side afterward, and it changes the shape of the day entirely. He told Catherine later that if the procession had gone wrong out on the square, if Camilla had held that gap and the broadcast had carried it, he had been ready to take his wife out of the formation completely and walk her back to the castle in full view of the cameras. He would have ended the Garter procession himself, rather than let the country watch that happen to her. It is the same 15-year-old boy in the dark suit, 29 years later, with the same single principle operating underneath everything he does. Nobody in this family gets quietly moved aside while he is standing next to them. Diana received that treatment for years from people who were unfailingly courteous about every part of it. Her son has spent his adult life making certain the same machinery never gets a second attempt at anyone he loves. Camilla did not go quietly, and she did not go loudly either. She went in smaller engagements, a longer time at a private house away from the family and the cameras, and a diary that has never returned to the size it carried in the spring. She spent 30 years walking into rooms that did not want her until the country finally stopped arguing about it. And she lost the whole thing in 40 seconds, on a square in Windsor, in front of the same cameras she had spent all those years learning to manage, because she could not accept sharing one photograph with a younger woman who never once asked to be there.